So 7 records to discuss this time. I'll be going through each one of them, talk about them, show you the vinyl, all of that. Heck, it's called Vinyl Haul. What else would I do? First up is the debut album from Canadian metal band Starlight Ritual. This is Sealed in Starlight, released by Temple of Mystery in 2021. So right away, we have touches of power metal here, but more a whole lot of traditional metal going on. A little bit of hard rock sensibilities as well. Also, one thing about the vocalist that's kind of interesting is there's a little bit of Dio worship going on. I don't think he sounds like Ronnie James Dio, but he definitely has some of those vocal inflections. Some of the vocal patterns are reminiscent of Sabbath-era Dio, but maybe some of Dio's solo career as well. I don't think I'm imagining that. Literally the first 2 words out of his mouth in the opening track are "look out." So there's definitely a little bit of Dio worship going on there for sure. Also digging the riffs on this one a bit. They are reminiscent of bands like Grim Reaper and Jag Panzer and very early Iron Maiden. You know, the good stuff. Vinyl variant for this one is Liquid Gold, limited to 150 copies. Very nice. I really like the Temple of Mystery logo, too. I've always liked that. They're a pretty cool label. Again, they're out of Canada. They handle Freeways and Thunderdome. They did that comp called Trapped Under Ice I showed in a previous Vinyl haul. Pretty cool. Also, you get an insert with picture of the band, some credits, and, of course, the lyrics. Did want to go through some favorites. I definitely have a few. One for the Road, great song. Also, The Riddle of Steel and Righteous Ones. Of the 3, I would start with The Riddle of Steel. Really killer track. Really dig it a lot. Also, the album did come with a few extras. We have a woven patch. Very cool. Also, a sticker with the logo right there. And an ad for a book that looks kind of interesting. The book is called No Speed Limit Quebec Metal. The history of Quebec metal from 1964 to 1989. I'm here in northern Vermont, so a lot of my local metal has been up in Montreal. I go to shows, so I'm pretty familiar with the metal scene up there in general. I don't know Quebec City very well, but I know Montreal quite a bit. So I am pretty fascinated in checking this book out. Looks like it's going to be pretty interesting. I did also want to mention the title track to this album, Sealed in Starlight. It's a bit of a power ballad, but it really does fit on the album. It doesn't feel tacked on like some other songs do. About a week ago, I was listening to Painkiller from Judas Priest, and I realized, especially now, how utterly tacked on A Touch of Evil sounds on that record. It really kind of deviates from the sound of what's going on. I don't hate the song, but it really is kind of a standout track and not in the best way possible. So I feel this one definitely belongs on this album. It's pretty decent. So Starlight Ritual has a couple of EPs preceding this. I hear they're a bit more doom metal. I haven't heard them myself, but this isn't doom metal. This is more epic, a little bit power metal, very traditional metal, of course. The riffs are pretty memorable. It's a little on the raw side, but I kind of dig that. Overall, I'm really, really liking this album, and I'm definitely wanting to hear more from this band. Absolutely. Next up is the 2021 reissue of the original 1991 debut album from American gothic metal band Type O Negative. This is Slow, Deep, and Hard, released by Roadrunner Records in association with Runout Groove. So, this debut album, a little less gothy than following albums. I believe this is a bit of a bridge album between Peter Steele's previous band Carnivore, which was more crossover thrash, and the more gothic metal to follow this album. This is definitely a transition album for sure. And a quick look at the gatefold here. We've got a bit of a bio on the band, also some credits, who's in the band. Of course, it's that green and black motif that Type O Negative always has on everything. And speaking of that green and black motif, you can definitely imagine that the vinyl follows suit. It is green and black. And in fact, a lot of the Type O Negative vinyl reissues or first time on vinyl issues have this theme for sure. Also comes with a poster here. We've got basically the back cover of the record. The picture of them at the phone booths. For those who remember phone booths, there you go. Definitely want to go through some favorite tracks. I don't need to look at this. Definitely Unsuccessfully Coping with the Natural Beauty of Infidelity, the opening track. pretty great. Zero Tolerance is a good one. Also, Gravitational Constant, which is usually just known as Gravity. Of the three, Zero Tolerance is my favorite track on this album, always has been, even from the beginning. I've had this album for like 30 years on some format or another, so I'm definitely very familiar with it. You should definitely check out Zero Tolerance. That's zero with an Xero. Also, what's really cool on this 30th anniversary edition of this album is a bonus track at the end. It has Hey Pete. Pete's Ego Trip version. You might remember this track. It was on their follow-up album, which was a faked live album called Origin of the Feces. It's on there, but this is another version. This is more studio, I guess you could put it. The thing I like about this track is it definitely has more of that Bloody Kisses sound to it. Bloody Kisses is the album after that. And so, like I said, this is a transitional album between Carnivore and that. This track really is definitely that transition because it has that sound. It could be very much more at home on Bloody Kisses, but it's here. Kind of dig that. Also, lyrically speaking, that bonus track bookends the album pretty nicely because it kind of revisits Unsuccessfully Coping lyrically again. So, pretty cool. So it's safe to say that the lyrics on this album were probably funnier to me in my younger years, my more immature years. Also, the playing is a little bit sloppier than I remembered, but that aside, this is still a really good album. It still holds up quite a bit. Of course, it does lead to better albums later on, but I'm still going to spin this one. I've got a bit of nostalgia connected to it. I still dig it quite a bit. So, yeah, there you go. Next up is the debut album from American doom metal band Grief Collector. This is End Delirium, released in 2021 by Petrichor. I should mention right off the bat that the vocalist for this band is none other than Robert Lowe. You might recognize him. He was in Candlemass for a little bit. There is some overlap between Candlemass and Grief Collector, I should say. Also, I'm hearing some hints of early Solitude Aeternus. That's probably also not a coincidence, considering that Robert Lowe sang for Solitude Aeternus. So if you like both those bands, you're going to hear a little bit of that in Grief Collector. So while I was listening to this album, I definitely thought of modern bands that would pair well with this record, or albums from modern bands that would pair well with it. I definitely thought of Crypt Sermon. Very cool band. The Ruins of Fading Light. Great album. I could definitely listen to those two albums back to back. Definitely. The vinyl variant for this one is red with black splatter. The red's really vivid. I really like it a lot. Limited to 100 copies. I should explain also that the vinyl version is missing 2 bonus tracks. Then Comes Darkness is one, as well as a Sabbath medley of Voodoo and Die Young, both songs Dio-era Black Sabbath. I do have some issues with the medley. I think it's kind of so-so. I don't think Robert Lowe's voice really measures up to Dio, and I know a lot of vocalists don't. There's some note substitution, some obvious note substitution going on, so Lowe can kind of fit into the song a little bit more. Obviously, Dio has more range. I also noticed Lowe's voice almost cracking, breaking up at the end of certain verses, particularly in Voodoo. It seems like he has trouble with that song in particular. And I was thinking of songs on Mob Rules that might be more fitting for Grief Collector, fit more in their wheelhouse, if you will. I think Over and Over would have worked a little bit better, but I don't know. Also, Die Young is one of my favorite Dio-era Sab songs, so maybe I'm a little bit more critical of that. But overall, I don't know. It's kind of lackluster, and I don't really miss it on the vinyl. So I definitely have some favorites. The opening track, Corridors, is pretty great. Also, When Sanity Eludes Me, and Misery Mongers. Of the three, I would definitely suggest When Sanity Eludes Me. Check out that track first. It's pretty great. There is a lyric video for the song Winter Sick. Decent track as well, though the end riff is insanely repetitive. It just goes on and on for a while. And all I'm thinking is, guys, stop the song. You made your point. But definitely check that out. All of that can be found at the Grief Collector YouTube channel. That's where all that is. Also, I did forget to mention there is an insert. We have full lyrics here, as well as a picture of the band. Photo brought to you by Metal Church. Incidentally, rest in peace, Mike Howe. I also want to say thanks to fellow metal YouTuber Liam over at the Death Doom Metalhead channel. He is definitely the one who inadvertently got me into Grief Collector. He showed before I did, so thank you. So I should admit that I'm actually warming up a bit to the Lowe-era Candlemass material, so maybe some of that brings me into this record quite a bit. There is a little bit of overlap, not heavy, but it's definitely there. Definitely digging this album quite a bit. It's getting repeated spins, and yeah, I can't wait for more material from this band for sure. Next up is the fourth studio album from American death metal veterans Massacre. This is Resurgence, released in 2021 by Nuclear Blast Records. I should say right off the bat, this is the first Massacre album in 7 years. Also a completely different lineup. Rick Ross and Terry Butler are gone. Cam Lee is back. And he's gotten a bunch of other people in here. It definitely has that classic Massacre sound to an extent, though there's also a bit of European death metal making its way into this record. I don't think that's an accident, considering 3/5 of this band are Europeans, including Raga Johansson. He's on here. Another European that's on here, and it was kind of funny because I heard his guest vocals on one of the tracks. I believe it was Into the Far Off Void, is none other than Dave Ingram from Benediction. It was funny because I heard the track, and I'm like, this sounds like Dave. And Dave and I are friends, so I messaged him, and I'm like, are you on the new Massacre album? Because I didn't look at the credits at all. And he's like, yeah, that's me. Of course, having Dave Ingram on this record, as well as Raga Johansson, don't think that's much of an accident, because the two of them have done a ton of musical projects together. Also, Dave and Cam are friends, so this whole incestuous death metal thing going on. It makes sense. A vinyl variant for this one is cyan and mustard with black splatter, limited to 700 copies. Got a little more mustard on my B-side here. Also comes with an insert. Get some credits. Great artwork, Cthulhu Mythos artwork. Obviously, the Cthulhu Mythos thing is all over the songs here. Lyrics, in case you need to know that. Pretty cool. Also, we have some favorites. Ruins of Relea, probably one of my very favorite songs on this album. Also, The Whisper in Darkness and Servants of Discord. If you want to see music videos, there is one for The Whisper in Darkness. There's also a lyric video for the Innsma Strain. You can check both of those out at the official Nuclear Blast YouTube channel. One thing I thought was kind of funny was how many times the phrase From Beyond shows up in these songs. It's in 4 different songs. From Beyond, of course, is their classic debut album from the early 90s. You should already own it. There are also 3 additional callbacks to other songs on that album in the lyrics of this album, so kind of fun. So a bit of a step up from the last album. That might have something to do with all the new band members. Also, I did say 3/5 of the band were European. There are 6 people in this band, and 4 of them are Europeans, so clearly I'm bad at the mathematics. Production is better than the last album. Also, there's more of a variety musically on this record as well. Definitely a step up, for sure. So if you're wanting to hear a somewhat return to form for this band, also if you really enjoyed the latest Benediction album, I feel like those 2 albums pair really well together. You should definitely check it out. It's pretty good. Next up is the debut album for traditional metal band KKs Priest. This is Sermons of the Sinner, released by EX1 in 2021. So right away, this is the project/band of ex-Judas Priest guitarist KK Downing, as well as ex-Judas Priest vocalist Tim Ripper Owens. That association is going to be important as I go through this record. Some might already know that. A couple things. The album starts with a spoken word track called Incarnation. I think it's goofy as all heck. It should not be on this record. You should just go straight into the next track, which is Hellfire Thunderbolt. Much stronger opener. Tim's vocals on this one also occasionally seem a little bit awkwardly shoehorned in, the vocal patterns in particular. It doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, it's kind of obvious. Also, and I think other people have addressed this, the lyrics are kind of dumb in parts, especially Raise Your Fists, which definitely sounds like some of the schmaltzier Manowar songs out there. Speaking of Manowar, KK's Priest does sound a little bit like Painkiller era Judas Priest run through a Manowar filter, or Manowar covering Judas Priest, take your pick. That's interesting because Manowar was obviously influenced by Judas Priest, albeit 70s Priest, but KK's Priest seems to be pulling, intentionally or not, from Manowar, so kind of an odd full circle. I don't know if they're doing it intentionally, by the way. Maybe it's just the way it ends up, but I kind of hear that. A vinyl variant for this one is limited edition silver vinyl with appropriate disc labels. The record also came with, since it is a limited edition, it did come with an insert here Autographed by KK Downing himself. Pretty cool. It looks like it was originally signed in a gold marker, but then they went over it with a silver marker, or he did. I have seen copies with gold, and I have seen copies with just silver. Somehow I got both, which is pretty interesting. Anyways, we also have some lyrics here on the inner sleeve, and some more lyrics, of course. Favorites, definitely have a few. Love Hellfire Thunderbolt. That's probably my very favorite song on this album. Also, Sermon of the Sinner is pretty great. Wild and Free, and Hail for the Priest. There are 5 music videos off this album, believe it or not. There's one for Hellfire Thunderbolt. There's one for Sermons of the Sinner. There is one for Raise Your Fists. There's one for Return of the Sentinel. And one for Brothers of the Road. Speaking of Brothers on the Road, is not on the vinyl, but the album does come with a CD copy, and it is on here. So in case you want to hear it, there it is. Truth be known, Brothers of the Road is probably one of the weakest songs on the album. I don't really miss it on the vinyl, so there it is. And I suppose if Massacre can have Return of the Corpse Grinder, KKs Priest can have Return of the Sentinel. Speaking of which, there are a number of Judas Priest callbacks going on here. Obviously, that one is a reference to The Sentinel, which is a song on Defenders of the Faith. Probably my favorite Judas Priest album, and The Sentinel is my favorite song on that album. We have Hail for the Priest, which sounds like Call for the Priest. We have Sermon of the Sinner, which obviously references Sinner, perhaps. It might be a stretch to also say that Wild and Free is referencing Running Wild. Take your pick. But yeah, it's going on here for sure. So given that comparisons to Judas Priest are pretty much invited by these callbacks, some of the lyrics, to the name of the band, I have to say this doesn't really measure up to Judas Priest's modern output. It's fine, but it's not mind-blowing. It's kind of what I wanted a little bit. I think future albums will probably be better. I think there's a little hope for that on this record. Again, it's not unlistenable. I do like this album. I'm just not in love with it. So there it is. Next up is the 9th studio album for Dutch progressive death metal band Pestilence. This is Exidium, released in 2021 by Agonia Records. And I should state, I've been a Pestilence fan for quite a while, since the debut album way the hell back in the 80s. That would be Malleus Maleficarum. Of course, their second album, Consuming Impulse, is considered a death metal classic, a very imitated death metal classic, and a lot of folks judge this band based on that album. It becomes the standard to judge this band a little bit. I do like the post-Martin Van Drunen Pestilence quite a bit. I like Testimony of the Ancients quite a bit. I like Spheres. So I'm a little more receptive to this more modern sound. And by modern, I mean since the 90s. So I know there are other purists out there or old school fans who only like the 80s Pestilence. Will they like this? Maybe so, maybe not. This one comes in a gatefold jacket, full lyrics, some credits. Picture them on the back with the song listings. Vinyl variant for this one is called Fire Breath. Pretty cool design. Limited to 700 copies. I'll go through what number I got in a little bit. I did want to show some other things here. We also have a poster of the band in funny masks, because who doesn't love funny masks? There you go. And I'm also not sure if this is my edition or all editions come with it, but I also got something else. The record itself came in this PVC sleeve with a giant P for Pestilence on it. Pretty interesting. This is also where you get the sticker, where I find out that I got copy 603 out of 700. This is pretty interesting. I don't know if I would keep a PVC sleeve on a record jacket over time. I don't know if heat or whatever would melt it. I don't know, but I'm going to hang on to this anyways. Why not? As for favorites on this album, I have 3 in particular. One for Morbis Propagationum, one for Internitionum, and one for the title track. If you're looking for music videos, there are 3 of those as well. One for Morbis Propagationum, one for Deificus, and one for Sempiternus. And yes, all of the song titles are in Latin. I don't know how accurate the Latin is. Maybe you can tell me in the comments if you know the language. But there you go. Needless, unnecessary, complicated titles. Goofius Maximus, you could call it. But you have to replace the U's with V's, because that's what they do. So old school death metal here, a little proggy at times, also some touches of modern death metal throughout. killer riffs, great leads, skittering a little bit into Voivod territory, which might bring some of the progginess into it as well. Definitely a killer record. I'm really digging this one with repeated spins, so definitely recommended. Next is the 6th studio album from Finnish death doom band Hooded Menace. This is the Tritonus Bell, released in 2021 by Season of Mist. So this latest album is a bit more accessible than previous albums. I know there are some people who are griping about that. I kind of dig it, by the way. Gatefold, lyrics, and the back with track listings in pink, because why not? One thing I noticed about the riffs on this album is they get a little bit King Diamond at times. I'm definitely hearing a little bit of King Diamond meets early Paradise Lost going on this record. I don't think the King Diamond association is necessarily unwarranted. This album is produced by King Diamond guitarist Andy LaRocque. I don't see any writing credit from him or playing credit on this album, but I just got a feeling that he's in there somewhere. Influentially, maybe uncredited in the writing of stuff, but yeah, I feel there's Andy LaRocque in here, and more than just the production end of things. Vinyl variant for my copy is purple vinyl, limited to 300 copies. This is also considered the first press. Other colors are subsequent presses. Got some favorites, as you could imagine. Chime Diabolicus is definitely high on my list. Those Who Absorb the Night is pretty great, and Scattered into Dark. Scattered into Dark is my very favorite song on this album. I would definitely recommend that one. Also, there is a music video for Those Who Absorb the Night. It's found at the Season of Mist YouTube channel. Go check that out if you wanna. And although the vinyl doesn't come with it, there is a bonus track on other formats of this album. There is a cover version of The Torture Never Stops from Wasp. Gotta say, lackluster cover. Didn't like it much at all. I'm not missing it not being on this album. So you can check it out if you want. I'm sure it's online, but yeah, I didn't care about it. Of course, if I'm to nitpick, I might have liked the length of some of these tracks dialed back a bit. They run a little bit too long. Again, that's a little bit nitpicky. Otherwise, you've got thick guitars on here, chuggy bass, putrid vocals. They really push this record into something really cool. And besides, look at the cover. You got the skull guy ringing the skull bell, emanating spirit skulls. Fantastic. Anyways, Hooded Menace, the Tritonus Bell, you should probably get it. And that's it for another episode of Vinyl Haul. Remember, if you like this video, give it a like. You can only do one, not two. Also, share the video with some friends and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. This is the Accusation Network. I do metal vinyl collecting videos once a week. At this point, sometimes twice a week, but usually once a week. Check out my playlist. I do almost a dozen shows, maybe more than a dozen now, I'm not even sure, on metal vinyl collecting. Pretty cool. And like I say, every video, I am looking for album and band recommendations. Maybe some of these bands remind you of other bands that you listen to, that you like, that you want to recommend, or albums from these same bands, you know? Some of these bands I've heard quite a bit of, others I've heard one album. So definitely let me know in the comments. Love the recommends. And of course, if you're a regular viewer of this channel and you don't know about my Patreon account, now you're going to know about my Patreon account. It is at patreon.com/The Accusation Network. I have exclusive content there on different reward tiers. I also show these types of videos up to 7 days early there for patrons. So definitely check out that page, check out the tiers, and see how you can contribute, because it's cool. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.